and engineering tradition.
We now move to First Minister's question time. Question number 1, Jan Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Today I am delighted to announce that I will be officially opening the new headquarters of global financial services firm FNZ, which supports more than 200 jobs in Edinburgh, as well as recruiting a large number of graduates. It's yet another example of a global company supporting jobs and investment and expanding its operations in Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Presiding Officer, yesterday I'm sure we were all shocked to learn that 200 Scots lost their jobs every day for the last 3 months. Unemployment is up 10% over the same period. There is a 25% rise in the number of women unemployed and the impact that must have on families, and a 123% increase in long-term youth unemployment over the last year. In the light of these figures, what changes can we expect in the First Minister's budget bill when it's published tomorrow?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, John Lamont is well aware the Scottish Government places the highest emphasis on job creation, and that has been the hallmark of all the budgets. Now, these unemployment figures are extremely serious, as they are across these islands. But John Lamont should also understand that we do not have, at the present moment in Scotland, the ability to increase demand in the Scottish economy. That lies with the Westminster Government, which is exactly why both myself, the First Minister of Wales, the First Minister for Northern Ireland, over the last month have repeatedly called for the UK Government to change economic direction in order to give us either that increase in demand now or the economic tools to do the job for Scotland.
I know this is a pattern, but I didn't expect to get Hunt the alibi quite so early in the process. This is not a game. We can trade figures. What we need to do is confront them. For the reality is, if the First Minister is saying that he has this as his highest priority, it is not working. It seems to me the First Minister simply, although being in power for 5 years, does not get it. Last summer, he claimed then that the unemployment figures demonstrate, and I quote, not that it wasn't their fault, but that the economic policy of the Scottish Government is delivering and is continuing to create and safeguard jobs across our communities. So, when the figures are good, he's fabulous. When the figures are bad, where's that alibi? With 200 Scots losing their jobs each and every day on his watch, does he still stand by the statement that he made in the summer?
First Minister.
Well, the statements in the summer, if Joanne Lamont cares to reacquaint herself with them, made it quite clear that the growth in jobs and activity that we saw in Scotland over that period of time would be put at risk unless the United Kingdom Government were prepared to change course. But Joanne Lamont and the Labour benches seem to think that this is a view only shared by the Scottish National Party. Well, I have here Labour's 5-point plan for growth. 5-point plan announced in November 2011. That is before last week's admission that their new economic policy is identical to the Conservative Party's economic policy. The 5-point plan includes a £2 billion tax on back bonuses, a temporary reversing January's VAT rise, a one-year cut in VAT on 5% on home improvements, and a one-year national insurance tax break. Each of these is the province of the Westminster Government. And the only area which is in the province of the Scottish Government, that is the switch to capital investment, is exactly the policy that's being pursued by John Swinney, both in terms of transferring from revenue to capital and in the non-profit distribution programme. Now, I don't mind so much. Well, actually, I do mind, but I think people in Scotland mind even more, that the Labour Party are now in cahoots with the Tories, both on the Constitution and on economic policy. Well, what I do mind is the Labour Party are not only in cahoots with the Tories, but they are in cahoots in denying this Parliament the economic tools we need to do the job for Scotland.
I'm sure that response will be a great comfort to the 200 people every day for the last 3 months who lost their jobs. The First Minister's response to the serious situation these families create is, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, somebody else did it, and by the way, you've all got problems and I haven't. This is a man who takes himself seriously. We know that. It's about time he took his job seriously. Because what concerns me, not just his breathtaking complacency about these horrendous unemployment figures, is the fact that he clearly did not see it coming. He now has more than £500 million extra from Westminster as a consequence of budget decisions that are there in his back pocket. Will the First Minister give us an assurance, and the people confronted with unemployment in our communities, will he give an assurance that every coin of that money will be spent in tackling unemployment and giving our young people some hope for the future?
First Minister.
Joanne Lamont begins to sound ever more like her predecessor, who pursued this theme week after week, and it didn't do him a great amount of good. You see, the people of Scotland know where the economic power lies at the present moment. That is precisely why they are demanding the economic powers from Westminster. And a classic illustration will be in the £500 million figure that Joanne Lamont has just indicated to this chamber. Is she not aware that 2/3 of that spending specified by Westminster is directed into the second part of this comprehensive spending review? You see, we believe that Scotland needs investment in the economy now. That is precisely why, along with the Labour First Minister of Wales, we have been jointly calling for the change in economic course from the UK Government, which will allow us to deploy these funds. While we have been calling for that change of course, the UK Labour Party have decided to back the Tories on the economy.
Joanne Lamont.
I said it already. I'm not playing a game. I'm not pursuing a theme. I am talking about the issues that have concerned the people of Scotland, and at the moment 200 Scots a day are losing their jobs, and he settles for party political jibes. And given the seriousness of that, given the seriousness of the situation and the pathetic response from the First Minister, I fear for those people who have lost their jobs. I fear for those people worried about losing their jobs. An uncaring Prime Minister and what looks increasingly like an ultra-complacent First Minister, uninterested in what the people of this country are talking about. A man here in the job for 5 years must at some point surely take responsibility. Of course, this is a man who wanted Scotland to join an arc of prosperity, which is now an arc of insolvency. This is a man who graduated. From the Fred Goodwin School of Economics and backed the deal that broke the bank.
Can we have a bit of quiet, please?
Yeah, I think sometimes they've got a problem what they're hearing. The reality is, in the real world, 200 people each and every day are losing their job on the First Minister's watch. When will the First Minister stop congratulating himself on how well he's doing his job and come up with a serious plan to create jobs for the people of this country?
First Minister.
Well, I'm afraid the apolitical script written by Paul Sinclair is no better than the scripts that were written by previous advisers. Now, listen, let's have a look. Let's have a look at the detail of one of the really serious issues.
Can we settle down, please? Enough.
No, I don't think the Labour Party will want to look at the detail. Let's have a look at the detail of one of the really serious issues. That's employment among women in Scotland. It's 7.8%, which is far too high. 7.8% in Scotland, 7.8% in England, 4.7% in Northern Ireland. Now, you might judge from that Northern Ireland has the best position. But if you look at employment in Scotland, that's the number of people in jobs. If you look at economic activity among women in Scotland, it's much higher than any other part of these islands. There's 7.8% is a substantial, worrying, critical figure, which is precisely why the Scottish Government now has 25,000 new modern apprentices in Scotland, 40% more than what we inherited from the Labour Party. And in 2010-11, nearly 10,000 of these were women, young women, starting a modern apprenticeship. That's 45% of modern apprenticeships are now started by women in Scotland, compared to a level of 27%, which is what we inherited from the Labour Party. The same applies to training to work in Scotland, where the number of women getting that opportunity is rising fast. And 36% of the European structural funds of the 40,000 women in Scotland who have benefited is a much higher figure than previously. So we are doing our bit with the powers under our control to rebalance and present justice in the economy in Scotland. Well, these are the detailed figures, and the Labour Party want detail. Now they don't like it when they get the detail, because it shows up the record that they had. So we have an opposition who have our own economic plan, which depends on economic policies being changed from Westminster. But they'll neither call for the powers for this Parliament to do that, and now they actually support these economic policies in the House of Commons. Little wonder, when I was in the Gulf this week, gaining jobs and investment for Scotland, Gulf Today was leading on the headline, "Labour faces Paul disaster" on the forecast from the Unite Union.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
Well, it's not been through lack of trying that I haven't had any recent meetings with the Prime Minister, but I'm delighted to say that the cock crowing for the 7th time, the Prime Minister has now agreed to meet me after the Scottish Government publishes the referendum consultation next week. I look forward to that meeting. It just shows that persistence can always pay off, even when meeting the Prime Minister.
Ruth Davidson.
I'm sure you are looking forward to meeting the Prime Minister, and as he explained, it is proper to meet the Secretary of State for Scotland in the first instance, as he is leading the process for the Government. Presiding Officer, the First Minister's goal is to separate Scotland from the United Kingdom and to replace those enduring links with ever closer union with the EU. Can the First Minister tell me how many times he or his Scottish Government has written to the relevant EU Commissioner asking about Scotland's accession to the European Union?
First Minister.
We've discussed a range of issues with European Commissioners over the years, and I hope and believe that Ruth Davidson is familiar with a very substantial legal opinion which would secure Scotland's position with the European Union. Incidentally, one of the most famous opinions was actually, I believe, commissioned by the Scottish Conservative Party from Lord Mackenzie Stewart, the only Scottish judge to preside over the European Court of Justice. Unfortunately, the Scottish Conservative Party didn't get the opinion they thought they would get, because Lord Mackenzie Stewart pointed out that Scotland would be in exactly the same position with regard to each other and to the European Union as the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, that idea that Scotland is a nation which would stand in equality with other nations, I know is a difficult concept for the Conservative Party, which is perhaps why the Chief Ruth Davidson in the first question seemed to indicate a new constitutional formulation that the only time a First Minister of Scotland gets to meet the Prime Minister is if he first goes through the Secretary of State for Scotland appointed by the Prime Minister.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, it was an extraordinarily long way of giving me no specifics at all from the First Minister there on a very simple question. And we know for a fact that, for example, certainly the current Commissioner for Enlargement, Stefan Füle, has never received any correspondence from the Scottish Government on this topic, which does beg the question, has the Scottish Government who has the Scottish Government been in formal contact with, and what has been the advice given? Because since 2007, the SNP's published document asserted that independent Scotland would continue in the EU. It's an assertion the First Minister continues to today. But the former President of the European Commission, Romano Prodi, says that's not the case. European Commissioners Franz Fischler and Joe Borg say that's not the case. Professor Robert Hazel and Dr Joe Merkins, experts on government and constitutional law, say that's not the case. And even the International Law Commission says that's not the case. They all say that Scotland would have to reapply to be a member of the EU, with the consequence that our farmers would be bankrupt without European payments, and while Scotland waits for renegotiation and forcing Scotland to adopt the euro on accession. But if the First Minister believes that him saying something often enough makes it become fact, but the Scottish people demand more than that mere assertion, the weight of expert opinion states Scotland would not be an automatic member of the European Union. So will the First Minister now publish any evidence he has to support his claim? Because the people of Scotland deserve an answer to this question.
First Minister.
Right, then can I offer the evidence of Emile Noel, the former Secretary-General of the European Union, Eamon Gallagher, former Director-General of the European Union, all of whom, along with Maitre de Roux, who edited the Dictionary of the European Union, have indicated that Scotland is a part of the European Union, and since the European Union has no provision to expel a member state or any part of a member state, then the negotiation in terms of Scotland's representation would be conducted from within the European Union. Now, in that question, I seem to think that Ruth Davidson actually said that there would be disaster about European payments. I thought the position of the Conservative Party is the European Union would face disaster without the payments from the United Kingdom to the European Union. So I think the Conservative Party should better reconcile two things. Firstly, the only conceivable threat to Scotland's current membership of the European Union comes from members of Ruth Davidson's own party in the House of Commons who are openly advocating the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union. Scotland is a European nation. As expert and legal opinion indicates, we put our position from within the context of the European Union, and this concept of Scotland as a nation standing equality with other nations may be difficult for the Conservative Party to grasp, probably explains the latest record low in their poll ratings this week, but it's not something that the Scottish people find at all difficult, hence the resounding position of the SNP, not just in the opinion poll ratings, but also in terms of being with the Scottish people and regarding Scotland as a nation equal and capable of exercising that equality in Europe, along with all the other European nations.
Constituency supplementary question, Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the proposed cuts at BBC Scotland, and in particular the action of Newsweek and Scotland at 10. Can I ask the First Minister if he shares my concerns, and in particular the effect this will have on political debate in Scotland, especially at this historic juncture, and the need for a full and informed debate on our future, and the only way we can achieve that is for control of our own broadcasting company?
First Minister.
At a time of such significance for Scotland, I also have deep concerns about the potential impact of job losses and programming cutbacks to BBC Scotland's output, particularly in relation to news and current affairs. Let me add that I do recognise the BBC is being forced to make difficult decisions because of the damaging licence fee settlement imposed by the UK Government. I think that reinforces why Scotland needs greater accountability and responsibility for broadcasting in our country. Well, I would hope that even I was going to call it the serried ranks, but that sounds too big for the Conservative Party of Scotland. I hope that even one or two of these Conservative members who are mumbling are actually concerned about the jobs of people working in news and current affairs in BBC Scotland.
Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be familiar with sayings of Macduff from his time representing Banff-and-Buchan. Does he share the concerns which are being expressed regarding the conduct of AIB in placing the firm into administration, in spite of the insistence of the owner in Wednesday's Press and Journal that there was no cash flow problem, nor had the company ever defaulted on a loan or supplier payment? And can he advise me if the Scottish Government are in contact with both the administrator and AIB to ascertain what has occurred here and ensure the future of the business is secured?
First Minister.
Yeah, this is the second time in 2 weeks a member has brought a constituency concern which involves the conduct of financial organisations or other people in terms of companies which have been moved into administration. I know in terms of Michael McMahon's query from last week that Fergus Ewing had a meeting with him this morning. So I'm aware of the situation regarding Sangs, and I share the concerns about this situation. Fergus Ewing yesterday wrote to the administrators of the company about the position. With regard to the point about the conduct of the bank, AIB, Mr Ewing will speak to the bank later today to discuss their approach and seek an urgent meeting with the bank. I can confirm, of course, that PACE representatives are on standby to offer support and will maintain close contact with administrators. However, the focus of what must be done, in terms of the detail that Mark MacDonald has brought to this chamber about the company's trading position, about its profitability, about its lack of exposure and debt, it should give each and every one of us the most serious concerns. In an economic position such as the one we currently face, I think it's the very least we can expect that lenders and banks and financial organisations are as supportive as they possibly can be in terms of companies in Scotland. And if the information that's come into the public domain is anything like accurate, then I think the most serious questions have to be asked in this particular case.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
A year ago, the First Minister's government told us that the national control of the police and the abolition of local policing would save £200 million a year. The Justice Secretary did admit at the time that the numbers weren't, and I quote, pound perfect in any way. So what is the annual saving in the government's plans published this week?
First Minister.
The Justice Secretary set out what the plans were, what the anticipated savings were, under a range of scenarios. That statement, in terms of my interpretation and reading of it, seemed to attract substantial support from across this chamber, and most people in Scotland seem to believe, and I think rightly, that we're offered substantial savings from having a national police service in Scotland. Now, of course, the Liberal Democrats are perfectly entitled to take a different view. I would just point out to Willie Rennie that they took that different view very volubly during the election. In fact, it's the only thing I can remember them saying during the election in Scotland, and the result did not indicate resounding support for their position.
Willie Rennie.
He's obviously not even read the document. Not read the document. The annual figure. He doesn't know the annual figure, the basis on which he proposed his plans. I can tell him that his own document makes it clear that almost all the headline figures that he quotes are not attributable to structure. The savings in the document are not attributable to the changes. He promised £200 million, but he sold us national political control of the police for nothing. And he has made these... And has he seen... Maybe he's seen this. The chart that shows the structure of the review that's going on. The project board, 2 deputy chief constables, a chief superintendent, a superintendent, 2 chief inspectors, an inspector, another inspector, a sergeant. All have been taken from frontline duty to deal with governance and structure. And there are 12 other units like this. Is it just those officers working on reorganisation, or are there more?
First Minister.
Well, 2 things. I would have thought most people would welcome that the people who are looking at the organisation of the new police service in Scotland are serving police officers. That seems to me an important innovation in government, to ask the people who do the job to formulate the plans for the future. I can also gently point out to Willie Rennie, if his party had their way, we wouldn't have 1,000 extra police force officers on the streets and communities of Scotland, and the lowest level of recorded crime in Scotland for over 30 years. The savings identified in the central assumption from Kenny McCaskill were £1.7 billion over 15 years. I hope that convinces Willie Rennie of my reading abilities. But certainly I don't think the Liberal Democrats, who, as we see from the Herald newspaper this morning, have arrived at a position that a post held by somebody called the Advocate General, Lord Wallace, sitting in a non-elected House, appointed by the party who came fourth in the Westminster election and resoundingly fourth in the Scottish election last year, appears to know better than the democratic parliament elected by the Scottish people and the Lord President, the highest judicial office in Scotland. So I think Willie Rennie in future should be the last person to talk about politicians dictating to the people.
As usual, when he loses the argument, he resorts to cheap shots about the issue. The First Minister would do better to focus on the withdrawal of local connectivity between the police and the communities. That is what he should be concerned about, not cheap shots about other politicians.
I'm afraid Willie Rennie even lost the support of his coalition partners at Westminster in making that particular point. Willie Rennie describes the position of an Advocate-General dictating to the Scottish judiciary and the Scottish Parliament as a cheap shot. I regard it as a very serious constitutional position indeed, and perhaps when Willie Rennie has the opportunity to think about it further, then perhaps he'll agree with me. Now, the basic disagreement between Willie Rennie, who proposes that we keep the current structure of 8 police services in Scotland, and the rest of us who think that the single service offers both economies, efficiencies and further improvements in police performance, is essentially this: that most of us, when we think of our local police, think of our local sergeant, our local superintendent, our local constable serving our officers, our communities around Scotland, and 1,000 extra officers that we now have doing that. Willie Rennie seems to think that local policing is about having 8 chief constables in Scotland. We think it's about local officers on the streets and communities of Scotland.
Question number 4, Colin Beattie.
To ask the First Minister what progress is being made in building international business connections.
First Minister.
Well, I've already mentioned the fact that I'm officially opening the headquarters of Global Financial Services Company, FNZ, in Edinburgh later today, and I hope that's recognised and welcomed across this chamber. On Tuesday, at the World Future Energy Summit in Abu Dhabi, I signed an agreement with His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the Chief Executive of the leading alternative energy company Mazda. It's the first agreement of its kind between Mazda and a nation, and that will see significant collaboration resulting in investment in low-carbon projects, development opportunities, as well as a partnership to boost Scottish university research into renewable energy.
Colin Beattie.
I thank the First Minister for his response and, of course, welcome both these developments. Does the First Minister agree with me that Westminster politicians should support the efforts of the Scottish Government to attract investment to Scotland, instead of petty fear-mongering that there is uncertainty as regards the referendum process, a claim to which they have been unable to produce a single shred of evidence?
First Minister.
Well, I'm beginning to perhaps get somewhat perplexed by opposition politicians in this chamber telling me they're concerned about unemployment investment in Scotland, while the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, supported, of course, in this, as in so much else, by the Labour spokesman at Westminster, are trying to damage investment in Scotland. So therefore, we should all be grateful to Channel 4 News this week and their widely respected Channel 4 fact check. Not, incidentally, owned by the Scottish Government or Alex Salmond, which totally demolishes the claims of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, pointing out that not only does Scotland punch way above its weight in terms of the attraction of international investment, but that percentage is increasing, and for the first time last year it actually attracted more international investment jobs than did the City of London. Therefore, concluding, Alex Salmond is right to claim that Scotland is a bonny investment, and according to the companies we spoke to, the matter of Scottish independence is of little concern. I think the Scottish people would probably take the word of Channel 4 fact check rather than any unionist politician looking at self-interest and we're prepared to attempt to damage Scotland's economic prospects to pursue a political argument.
Question number 5, Neil Findlay.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government supports the aims of the National Union of Students Scotland campaign, Our Future, Our Fight.
First Minister.
Yes, the Scottish Government does support the principal aims of the National Union of Students campaign. which is why last week the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning made clear in his letter to college principals that they will receive funding in the next academic year, which allows college places to be maintained.
Neil Findlay.
I'm sure the 60,000 students who have sent emails to members across this Parliament protesting at the disproportionately high cuts to college places, local access, teaching quality and especially student support will be very interested in his response. Senior managers, principals and trade unions have raised similar concerns. Will the First Minister now show leadership and accept that at a time of very high youth unemployment, it will be impossible to maintain student numbers while colleges are subjected to a £36 million cut in teaching grant and an £11 million cut in student support?
First Minister.
I'm not finished yet. I'm not finished yet.
You have finished, First Minister.
Oh, come on.
You have finished, First Minister.
Neil Findlay will want to look at student support, and it compares extremely favourable with what's on offer elsewhere in these islands. Also, the commitment on places in terms of the Cabinet Secretary's letter stand, as does the Scottish National Party's manifesto commitments. But I'm never very sure which Neil Findlay I'm hearing from in this chamber. I'm sure, for example, people will be interested to learn that when West Lothian Council held a budget meeting on 11th of January, a councillor, Neil Findlay, voted against increasing resources to support 30 more young people into work through a range of interventions. So, I look forward, yes, I see him nodding, I look forward to hearing how MSP Neil Findlay will work to stop Councillor Neil Findlay trying to prevent opportunities for West Lothian's young people.
Murdo Fraser.
To ask the First Minister what impact the sale of Robert Wiseman dairies to Muller Dairy will have on the Scottish economy.
First Minister.
Well, as the member will be aware, Robert Wiseman Dairies has accepted an offer of £279.5 million from German company Muller. Wiseman currently processes and delivers around a third of the fresh milk consumed in the UK today. They employ 1,000 people in Scotland. There are over 1,000 producers contracted to supply the company as members of the Wiseman Milk Group, and a quarter of these producers farm in Scotland from milk fields in Aberdeenshire, Fife, the Central Belt and South West Scotland. The Scottish Government have made it clear to both Wisemans and Muller that it wants this takeover to have the effect of protecting jobs and investment. The Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Environment met with William Keane, the MD of Wiseman Dairy, on Tuesday of this week and received assurance that the Wiseman brand will retain its existing presence in the Scottish dairy market. It was also made clear to the Cabinet Secretary that for farmers there will be no change to the current milk contract as a direct result of the takeover. Shareholders of Wiseman, I should say, have 21 days to consider the takeover, and I'll meet with senior representatives of Muller as soon as possible after that period is over.
Thank you. Can I thank the First Minister for his response, but I'm surprised that he seems so sanguine about the loss of another Scottish headquartered company, when in opposition the SNP took a different view. When Scottish Power were taken over by Iberdrola, the now Deputy First Minister said in this chamber that it was time for some explicit economic patriotism, and that we should defend our national companies when they are under threat of extinction. That, she said, is what grown-up national governments do the world over. So can I ask the First Minister, why do the SNP say one thing in opposition and say something quite different when they get into government?
First Minister.
Well, I thought that Murdo Fraser, when he tabled this question, we wanted a serious account of what the Scottish Government are doing and have done to protect the jobs in Scotland and the contracts which exist for the rural industries of Scotland. If we want to have a political debate about it, I might add that Murdo Fraser and I support the sort of economic powers that will allow us to build a competitive base to make sure there are more decision-making in Scotland. Well, I see Murdo Fraser seems to be recanting on the policy which he took into the Scottish Conservative leadership election. I have to say that it is my opinion that, who knows, if the Scottish Conservative had adopted more of that reproach, which may or may not be held by Murdo Fraser now in terms of economic decision-making, then perhaps, just perhaps, their slide in the opinion polls, as recorded this week, would not be as rapid as it undoubtedly is.
That ends First Minister's question time. I now suspend